Hello, everybody. Let's go ahead and let's get started and welcome everybody to the Detecting Emergent Threats in Injury and Violence Using Network Science Challenge webinar. So today we'll be covering a few things. I'll start off by giving everyone an introduction to freelancer.com. From there, the CDC team and Naoki Masuda will give us the challenge background as well as more information about the requested outcomes and about network science approaches. Then I'll walk everyone through the challenge schedule, how to participate and submit in this challenge, and also discuss eligibility. And then we'll close off with some live questions and answers from there. So before we get started, I want to quickly introduce myself and the speakers today. So first of all, my name is David, and I work on the freelancer.com enterprise team, and I'll be your host for today. From the CDC, we have Royal Law, who will be taking us through the challenge background and the requested outcomes. We also have Naoki Masuda, who will be following Royal with some information about network science approaches, more about Royal and Naoki in a little bit. A few things before we get started. So number one, this call is being recorded and the recording will be made available through the challenge page, and as well we'll send it out to everybody who has registered for this webinar via email. Number two, please also use the Q&A panel, okay, for any questions that you have today. Looks like we have a few questions already, so thank you for those. We have a dedicated portion of this webinar for all of your questions, so please make use of that. Please use the Q&A panel instead of the chat function, okay? We'll only be addressing questions in the Q&A panel. Lastly, if we do not get to your question today, we'll make sure to add them and answer them through the FAQs document that will be attached to the challenge page. Okay, so really quickly, I wanted to kick things off with a little bit about freelancer.com. And so this challenge is being hosted on freelancer.com, and that means that you will have to go through the platform to enter into the challenge. So what is freelancer.com? Freelancer.com is the world's largest freelancing and crowdsourcing marketplace by number of users and by number of jobs that have been posted. To date, we have over 56 million users globally and over $4.5 billion in jobs posted. When we talk about this idea of connecting our users globally, we mean it. And so here is a map of our users plotted in white and on a black canvas. And pink is where work is usually being posted, and blue is where work is usually being done. Freelancer.com's challenge platform specifically is what we'll be discussing today. Freelancer.com's challenge platform allows participants from all over the world to submit their entries that a challenge holder can then pick and choose from. To date, there have been over 1.5 million challenges posted and millions of dollars in prizes that have been paid out. And that leads me into this specific challenge today and the prizes to be won for this challenge. So we'll soon be hearing from Royal and Naoki about the challenge background and requested outcomes, but here's what's available for you guys. So this challenge here offers a total prize purse of up to $16,000 US. The main prize here will be broken down into $15,000. So that's broken down into a top prize of $7,500 for the best solution, $5,000 for second place, and then $2,500 for third place. And then we also have an additional purse of up to $1,000 US that includes up to 10 $100 prizes that'll be made available for innovative solutions. Note that only submissions that meet the challenge and eligibility requirements will be eligible for these awards. So as you can see, that's a decent amount of cash up for grabs. And so with that, I would like to introduce Royal from CDC to tell you more about how you can get these hands on these prizes. A little bit about Royal before I hand things over to him. So Dr. Royal Law is the lead for the data science team in the CDC National Center for Injury Prevention and Control. In this role, he manages a multidisciplinary team of health scientists, computer scientists, and statisticians to apply novel analytics and data science approaches to topics across the Injury Center. Dr. Law earned his doctorate in epidemiology at Georgia State University, his master's in public health at Emory University, and his bachelor's in biomedical engineering at the Georgia Institute of Technology. Royal, you have the floor.
Great. Thank you, David, and thank you all for being here. I'm excited to be here and talk a little bit about the background of this project. So my name is Royal. As David mentioned, I'm the lead for the data science team in the CDC National Center for Injury Prevention and Control, also called the Injury Center. Excited to kick off this data challenge in collaboration with NASA and Freelancer, really focused on detecting emerging threats in Injury and Violence using Network Science. I'm just going to provide some brief remarks about the background of this project, and then I'll pass it over to our Network Science SME, Naoki, and also to Freelancer to talk a little bit more about the details of the challenge. So injury is the leading cause of death for children and adults between the ages of 1 and 45, and there are an estimated 192,000 people who die from violence within the US each year. The CDC Injury Center is focused on tackling this monumental challenge by doing, primarily a few activities, things like tracking data and trends as it relates to fatal and non-fatal injuries, also researching what works to prevent injury and violence, and then also funding programs and activities that work and are effective in tackling these very important topics. So, in particular, the CDC Injury Center has kind of what we consider to be 3 priority topics where much of our current efforts are focused on, and this includes protecting our youth, that's the first tab here on the left, from adverse childhood experiences. So adverse childhood experiences are essentially traumatic events that occur in childhood, things like physical, emotional, sexual abuse, childhood neglect, or growing up in a household with substance abuse, for example. And we know that exposure to these sorts of adverse experiences are linked to a wide range of negative outcomes, things like suicide, overdose, cancer, and heart disease. One of the challenges to adverse childhood experiences is it's hard to identify and it's hard to link to various types of outcomes, given that oftentimes the outcomes are many years, many decades after the exposure to an adverse childhood experience. And so, innovative and novel approaches to identifying and tracking ACEs, ACES, are kind of very, very critical as a part of our work. The Injury Center is also focused on combating drug overdoses. It's a very big challenge, particularly within the United States, with 70,000 people dying from drug overdoses, of which 70% of those involve opioids like prescription opioids, heroin, and synthetic opioids like fentanyl. And then our third priority is preventing suicide. So suicide is the 10th leading cause of death in the United States, with over 47,000 people dying by suicide in 2019. We've seen a sobering increase in suicide rates in the US over the past 20 years, from 1999 all the way up to 2019. And it's certainly a primary issue now, as we know, the mental health of this country is suffering as a result of the COVID pandemic. And so it's certainly a front and center priority for our center as we move forward. And so, Freelancer will really go into the challenge details later, but I wanted to provide the context about these three topics as to why this data challenge is important. And so the purpose of this challenge will be focused on one of these 3 challenges. And so really the ask here is that challengers really look at these 3 different topics and choose one of them that they want to focus on for their project. Next slide, please. So as a part of our work in preventing injuries and violence, we acknowledge the importance of being at the cutting edge of data and analytics, which is why we've outlined a set of data science strategies for the Injury Center. I'm not going to go over all of the strategies, but really what I wanted to point out in this slide is strategy 3, which is improving rapid identification of health threats, which is exactly tied to the purpose of this data challenge. So, how can we harness novel and real-time data sources, things like social media data, to identify health threats so that we can be more responsive to the emerging threats that our communities face. And that's ultimately the goal of all of this work. It's also not, so this challenge is not only tied to a specific project, but also tied to this larger vision of how we want to be more responsive to the needs of our communities. Next slide, please. And so, ultimately, everything that I've spoken about up until this point really ties back to the challenge purpose, which is exploring innovative network science approaches to detect emerging threats within those 3 priority injury topics. Network science is a field that has been generally underutilized within the injury and violence space. We know that network science has been useful in identification of infectious outbreaks, that individuals in the center of a social network, for example, are more likely to be infected with an infectious disease compared to those in the fringes of a social network. So, how can this concept be applied to injury topics? Examples include things like the spread of misinformation, for things like misinformation of opioids, or the spread of suicide promoting material for young adults. Can those sorts of topics be considered within a network the same way that an infectious disease can be analyzed within a social network? So there's a lot of many different applications to network science within this violence and injury space that really makes this project so exciting. Next slide, please. So that's the end of my remarks. I really want to thank you all for your time on behalf of the Injury Center, and thank you for your interest in this project. There certainly is a monetary prize for this challenge, but really the added prize, in my opinion, is kind of the innovations gleaned from the winners will really help improve the Injury Center in preventing deaths related to these very important topics. So I encourage you to compete, and we are very excited to see the results. And thank you all for your time.
Perfect. Thank you, Royal. And keep in mind that if you do have questions for Royal, please get them in through the Q&A panel and we'll address those at the end. I do see a hand up, so make sure you, if you have a question, get it through the panel. So next up, we have Naoki Masuda, who will be taking us through network science approaches. A little bit about Naoki. Naoki Masuda received his PhD in 2002 from the University of Tokyo, and he's worked as a lecturer and then an associate professor at the University of Tokyo in Japan between 2006 and 2014. He then worked as a senior lecturer and associate professor at the University of Bristol, UK, between 2014 and 2019. He moved to the Department of Mathematics at University at Buffalo in 2019 as associate professor and was recently promoted to full professor in September 2021. His research interests include network science and mathematical biology. In network science, he's particularly known for his work on temporal networks, models of epidemic processes, and random walks on networks. He has also worked on network analysis of various data sets, including suicide ideation on online social networks and fraud detection in online marketplaces. Naoki, over to you.
Thank you, David, for very precise and detailed introduction of me. So let me just guide you to the what the network science approach means for this project. Thanks. This part was already explained by Royal. So we have three projects, three topics, which we wish to apply the network science to. Okay, could you go to the next slide, please? Okay, so let me just briefly introduce what network science is. Perhaps, even though some of you may be already familiar with that. So there are many types of networks, ranging from social networks and biological networks, or the infrastructure, or the information networks, or others. So what is the common among these networks is that this is a collection of nodes and the edges which connect to nodes. So this is also known as a graph in graph theory in mathematics and computer science. The graph theory, a graph in graph theory, and a network in network science are the same thing. Okay, so could you go to the next slide? Next slide, please. Okay, so how this network science emerged? So there are various opinions, but there were two key papers published in 1998, 1999, which are shown here. And of course, there are some the work on network science before these 2 years, but still, these two papers really initiated this field of network science as we recognize now. So the field is like 20 years old, and what should we do? Okay, so we try to find some interesting structure from network data, which is shown on the left side of the slide. And we are also interested generally in the modeling and dynamics, how for example, information spreads, or how the COVID, the infection spreads in the social networks. And depending on the viewpoint, using either of these two approaches or both approaches or different approaches like an inference or data science tailored to network analysis. So we have had various interesting and very practical applications of network science ideas to industry and to understand social, to understand and mitigate into the social, let's say, the problems, for example, right? So could you go to the next slide, please? So what have we discovered? So there are some examples. For example, we know that our networks are mostly very heterogeneous in the following sense. Okay, if you look at this figure, so there are a small number of nodes, let's say people who are connected to many others, like one in the circle, one in a red circle to the right, right? And there are some other similarly well-connected nodes. Whereas most of the nodes are not like that. So they have only they are only connected to, let's say, 2 or 3 others, like the node circled in red to the left, right? So there are a lot of heterogeneity, which is sort of is different from what we know from our intuitive understanding before, like the normal distribution or exponential distribution, if you know these terms. But anyways, there is only a relatively small fraction of nodes which are connected to many others, which often govern the dynamics, how the information on, let's say, epidemic infection spreads, something like that. So the many networks ranging from social networks to biological networks, so the, let's say, internet or World Wide Web, very often have this property called scale-free networks. Okay, this is just one famous example of what the network science has found in the past 20 years, on the early say 8 years of this network science around 1999 or 2000. Yeah, next slide, please. So here's another famous application, so which is called a community detection. So if you are shown this figure, okay, you might recognize 4 groups of nodes. The definition of the group is such that, so, okay, nodes are interconnected densely with many edges, relationships within each group, which is shown by the dotted line, right? Whereas among the across different groups, so we don't have many connections. There are some, but many connections, not many connections, right? And each of such a group is called a community. And then the question is how to define such a community and how to detect communities from the given data. So this is this problem is called community detection, and perhaps it might be one of the very biggest, network science application. And we want to generally associate community, detect the community with something. For example, something who says a group of individuals who might share opinions, or they might share something else, or they might belong to the same institution, or they might share the idea, suicide ideation, for example. So this is another example. Could you go to the next slide, please? So the centroid is another topic. Centroid is a network science jargon to mean the node importance, which is the most important node in network. So if you are shown the figure to the right, you might recognize that this the central this node shown by the inverted triangle is a central, right? It looks like a central. But if you count the number of edges, number of friends, right, this node has, it's 4. It's not the largest. If you look at the other nodes, which are the 4 nodes surrounding this centrally looking node, right? Then each of these guys has this number of connections, 6, which is larger than 4, right? So this a small exercise shows us that just counting the number of the friends is not often enough. Of course, number of friends or number of contacts would be the simplest indication of how important the node is, right? But however, network science has discovered that this is not always the case. This is often useful, but not necessarily. So there is this different, the so-called centrality measures. I don't touch upon the details, but which capture this importance of nodes in different senses. And which centrality measure we should use depends on what application we have in mind. Okay, could you go to the next slide, please? Okay, here's another application called network motifs. So the right figure shows the let's say some patterns of triangles, right? So if you look at this first 4 rows only, so they are directed, the triangles, but some of the triangles are closed triangle like this, some are not. Anyways, if you enumerate all the possible types of such the directed triangle like network, then there are only 13 patterns. And in this particular analysis method, tries to find which one is more frequent in your data set. And this might tell something about how the information spreads, or these other things like how the gene regulates another, etc. So this is another way to analyze the network data. Next slide, please. On dynamics. So this is one among the very many examples which are about this dynamics of network. So in this particular paper, this is a schematic figure, but it's trying to show how the fake news, or they say, by the way, so the citation is not shown here, but say the original slides contain citation. So this comes from one paper, particular paper, which is sort of random selection. So there are many papers of this sort. But this particular paper, they looked at how they say fake news spreads. This is a bit, a schematic figure, so it doesn't show the precise results. Of course, this is not the intention of this figure. But let's say, so it starts from some group 1 and 2, and say the group 3, and say propagates to other groups. So by using some dynamical simulation, but how this information spreads, or to analyze data in such a way, so we can discover we aim to discover which is a source node of the information, how they say fake news or real news have spread to the large part of networks. Next slide, please. So there are many network science resources. So you have access to these resources later. But there's a free book. So Wikipedia articles is reasonably good. And we have a network science society, which has a website and hosts conferences, and there are some journals dedicated to network science. And there are many freely available software with which you can visualize and analyze your network datasets. Next slide, please. And let me just show examples of the what we expect in this challenge. So the Professor Nicholas Christakis, now at Yale, has and his colleagues, including the Professor Fowler in UCSD, they have devoted a lot of efforts to try to identify how the the obesity, for example, or depression, those things spread within the social networks. They have a precise data and methods. So I don't explain the details, but you can find for example, many TED talks by the Professor Christakis. And this I'm just showing one of the original paper they wrote like 10 years ago. So this is one approach. So they say here the approach would be to find a social network data and which has the information about who is obese, for example, etc. To try to identify how the information spreads, or how the close the related to obese people are in the network, etc. Next slide, please. And here's another example. This paper was cited in our challenge website and document. So this particular paper, this is one of the many papers doing this sort of thing. So I'm not saying that this paper is special on that. But anyways, this particular paper looked at the co-prescription network where the node is a patient, and the edge, it's not a friendship, but this overlap of opioid prescribers between two patients. So if they share, two patients share, and many prescribers of opioids, and we got that they are connected by an edge. It's not like a friendship, but still it's in a social type. And their main result is nodes with a so-called high page rank, which is one of the centrality methods to prioritize rank nodes are associated with some opioid overdose. This is another example. So there are basically two things I want to say. So one is in this slide. So I say, okay, so there are several things I want to say. Okay, I presented several major approaches like scale-free networks or community detection or the motif analysis, but we are not restricting the approaches you are going to use, right? So it should be related to networks, but you can do any other approach, of course. And another thing I want to say is that it doesn't have to be social networks. Social networks are easier to understand, and many of that data like that. But the figure to the right shows the symptom network. So where each node is symptom of, I think, depression. But anyways, if the two symptoms are connected by edge, and the thick or the thin line, which is called edge, this means that these two symptoms are somehow related to each other. So this is not obviously a network of social networks, right? But we are not limiting ourselves to social networks. Okay, so okay, thanks. And this is the last slide. And the proposal should not be a general statistical or the AI or other data analysis. So this challenge is about neuroscience methods, which are sort of broadly construed, but still, I mean, it has some specificity about neuroscience, right? So it's not about the general AI techniques. And I'm not saying that say the neuroscience approaches are better than those, I mean, the general AI techniques or the various machine learning techniques. What I want to say is that it's okay. We are tapping the potentials of neuroscience approaches, which, as Royal said, this is which is underused in this to understand, say, the violence and injury in violence injury space to those problems. That's the aim of this, the competition. And last thing I want to say is that okay, so we have say deep neural networks, the graph neural networks, and these two, I mean, basically say deep neural networks, right? So these, I mean, terms contain networks, but we don't regard this as an example of network science. Okay, so they're very different things. So however, I'm not discouraging the use of that. If the deep neural networks, let's say, say used to understand whatever, say social or non-social networks of our interest, that's fine. So I'm not excluding that, but having using deep neural networks does not qualify as a network science project. Okay, and also please include the data components and also the mention the data sources, which is quite important for us. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Naoki. All right, let's go over the challenge timeline as the next step. So to start off, the challenge has launched and is live right now as of November 10th, 2021. What that means is that you will be able to access the challenge link through freelancer.com. You can do things like adding comments or questions to the public clarifications board. And then once you are ready to submit your entry, you have until January 5th, 2022 at 5 p.m. Eastern time to be able to submit your entry. Judging will also follow that between January 6th and January 31st with the awards announcements on February 1st, 2022. So here's how you can participate, and we've simplified this into an infographic for you guys. So step number one will be to create an account on freelancer.com. So as we mentioned before, you will need this account on freelancer.com to submit your entry. So make sure you create one as soon as possible. Step two, read the challenge brief in full. There is a link on the challenge page where you can actually see the full version of the challenge brief. And there's a lot of information in that brief. So make sure you do read that in full to ensure that you are eligible to participate. Step three, ask questions. There's a public clarifications board for you to ask questions, so make sure you make use of that. Step four is an important one, and that is to register, and there's a link for you to do that in the challenge brief. Step five, work on your entry after your registration is approved. Step six, submit your entry before the submission deadline. Now, I can't stress this enough, please do not wait until the very last minute to submit your entry. For one, if you do submit your entry within a reasonable time before the deadline, freelancer.com and staff members can help ensure that your entry is complete. Additionally, you may be asked to required to kind of update your profile on freelancer.com before you can submit. So don't leave it to the very last minute because you won't have time to do that if that's the case. So get your entries in on time. Lastly, before we dive into the live Q&A, here's a quick summary on eligibility. So keep in mind that I am summarizing this and oversimplifying this for the purpose of this webinar, but please take the time to read this in detail in the challenge brief, okay? So number one, by participating in a freelancer.com contest, each participant must agree to and abide by freelancer eligibility policies, freelancer user agreement, and freelancer copyright infringement policy. Each participant must also complete and comply with the freelancer.com KYC process. All team members must meet freelancer eligibility policies. Number two, all team members must be at least 18 years old. The team lead must be eligible to receive payment under the laws of the United States. U.S. federal sanctions prohibits participation from certain countries. Number three, NASA and employees of challenge partners are not eligible to participate. Federal employees acting within the scope of their employment are not eligible to participate. Any individual or entity associated with the development or administration of this challenge is ineligible to compete. Government contractors working on the same or similar projects are ineligible to participate in the challenge. Lastly, funds from U.S. or foreign government organizations should not be used directly fund the development of a solution to this challenge. Solutions that were previously developed with government or federal funds or where government or federal funds were utilized to prepare the submission or solutions are prohibited. Great, so that brings us to the final portion of this webinar, which is the live Q&A period. And we got some questions in the Q&A panel already, but make sure if you have questions for Naoki or Royal or for freelance.com, make sure you get those in now. Okay, and while you guys are getting your questions into the Q&A panel, we'll kick off with a very popular question here regarding participating from a specific country. So can I participate from this country or that question? And the answer is you have to check that link. Okay, so we put a link in there. It's part 25, section 3. If your country is not eligible, you cannot participate as an individual. However, you can still collaborate with a team whose team lead is from a designated country or the US. Regardless, the team must follow the two things, which are that number one, submissions must still originate from either the US or a designated country, and check that link again, or be substantially transformed in the US or designated country prior to delivery pursuant of FAR 2543C. Also check that link there in case, just to ensure that your country is not under country-specific sanctions. Okay, we got another question here. How do I register for this challenge? Anna, do you want to take that question? Anna from the freelance.com team.
Sure, thank you, David. So to register for the challenge, you have to create an account on freelancer.com first, and then fill out the registration form that you can access from the challenge page.
Thank you. A couple questions regarding the recording of the presentation. So yes, once again, this webinar is being recorded, and we'll send out the link. We'll put the link on the challenge page as well as sending it out to everybody who has registered by email. Okay, next question here. Which injury topic should we select between adverse childhood experiences, suicide, and drug overdose? Anna, do you want to take that one too?
Yeah, so it is up to each participant or each team to select a topic. If you have the time, of course, you're welcome to select multiple areas and address them in your solution. So.
Perfect. And how do we submit the solution, Hannah?
So the solution may consist of two parts. One will be the submission form, and the second will be the code that you're submitting. And the submission form, you can download that from the challenge page, just where you can find the registration form as well. And to submit the submission form, you must log into your freelancer account and submit it through the challenge page. The code instead must be uploaded into your private GitHub repository and shared with the challenge team. Instructions on how you can share your code with the team can be found in the challenge page and the challenge brief.
So we're going to go into some of the live questions here. And the first one, Royal, I know you answered this one over chat. So if you do want to read the full answer, please go into the answer section. But Royal, regarding the ethics within data science, do you want to just briefly go through that?
Yeah, sure. So thank you for the question. So we've given a lot of thought about this, and I'm interpreting the question as in general ethics within data science, not ethics within this particular project, but within that broader context, our center has been focused on potential ethical considerations that may come up as new data sources and new methods are being used and created for advancing public health within the injury and violence space. And so, we feel like our role is not necessarily to answer these ethical considerations or dilemmas, but to at least confer with the community and come upon a consensus with the thought leaders of this particular space to think about how to address and how to minimize some of these kind of ethical conundrums that might come up, particularly within data science. And so if you do want to read more about our specific activities, we do have a more written out sort of publication on ethics around data science, and I've posted that link. Or I can post that link. David, I'm not sure if I need to post it in the chat or if
we'll send out the answer to that, and then the link will be included in the document as well, the FAQ.
Sorry. Great. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, so one for Naoki. So regarding the point about spreading obesity on social networks, can you clarify that point?
Sure. So if one person is obese, they found that if the one person is obese, fat, and there is a tendency that that person's direct friend tends to be, obese as well. So this shows some correlation. And also, if one person is obese, if you see a friend of this person, that person tends to be obese to some extent. So this motivated them to ask the question whether obesity spreads from one person to another. It's not like a disease, of course not, but as a social habit. If, for example, if I tend to have a junk food, then my friend tends to have a junk food, right? So in this way, so they looked at whether the obesity socially spreads from the one person to another in other statistical with statistical significance. Okay, and they did this similar studies for other entities like depression or the other various things, whether they spread in social networks or not.
Thank you. And another one for you now. Okay, so we have someone who's really interested in network science. What are the steps for them if they want to formally work towards a degree?
Yeah, this is an interesting question. Okay, let me just go brief because it's not directly related to this project. But okay, so there are many professors leading the network science research groups across the globe now. Well, it might be difficult to find them in some country, like some continent like Africa. But if you go to Europe or the Asia or the United States or Canada or Australia, wherever, so you can find them. So I think one of the first things to do is to just look at the websites and the society, which I mentioned in one of the slides, and to study where and they who are researching, which professors are researching on network science and which laboratories you are interested in joining, and then contact them.
Perfect. And going back to Royal, so question for you. How specific can we get with our analysis? So for example, can we focus on preventing suicide among a specific demographic, or does it have to be more general?
Yeah, thank you for the question. And we are purposely allowing a lot of freedom for challengers to decide how to tackle this. And so the answer specific to your question is it really depends on what you feel like your challenge wants to focus on. We found in general that suicide dynamics and suicide trends is really different based on demographics. And so targeting broadly in general tends to lead to treatments or interventions that may not necessarily be specifically targeted enough for specific demographics. And so if there is a focus on a specific demographic, that's certainly a good approach, as we found that targeting specific demographics may be able to lead to more effective interventions.
Thank you. And last question here in the Q&A panel. So guys, if you have questions, right, this is your chance to ask directly from the challenge holders. So get your questions in. But last question is, should we collect the data sets by ourselves, or will you be supplying data sets? Naoki, do you want to answer that one?
Sure. So we are not providing particular data set, right? So then the data set should be collected or mentioned by the applicant, the applicant themselves, and also they clearly mention the data source so that we have an access. I mean, anybody can have an access or not, etc. So this is something described in the documentation. So please have a look. But anyways, we are not providing data.
Thank you. Any last questions here? While you're getting your last questions in, here's another prepared question. So how do we contact you if you have questions? This is really related to a question that just came in. So how do we contact you, or who do we contact rather, if we have more questions? And so we do have an email here set up for questions that if you want to send it to us privately. So that's cdc-ncipc@freelancer.com. So that's how you can contact if need be. Okay, any last questions? Going once? Going twice? Okay, here's 19 minutes.
So somebody asked the question in the last minute, which is how to collaborate with us during the project, something like that.
Yeah, do you want to address that a little bit?
Actually, I don't know the answer.
Okay, yeah. So I
Sorry.
guess I treated that question as almost like a collaboration. So if you do want to like, ask us questions and interact with us, the best way to do that is through that email or on the public clarifications board. Okay, so the public clarifications board on freelance.com is also your way to interact with the challenge holders, with freelance.com staff. And so that will be where to go. Okay, we got another question here. So with a specific link. And so we will address that question. We'll take a look at that link and then we'll address that question on the challenge brief here. Give us some time to actually take a look at that. And so we'll see if we'll let you know if it's considered out of scope for this challenge. Okay. All right. So thank you guys for all your questions and thank you to Royal and Naoki. And we will see you guys all soon. And thank you so much and good luck to everybody.